Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm Michael.
And today, I don't know why you made me watch this movie.
You know, I was watching this movie Thursday night, and I was like, wow, Blake's going to hate this. It's kind of like when my first episode on, you let me pick the movie, and I took a big swing with 8.5.
Yeah.
So I think the message here is don't let me pick the movies anymore. I think we're kind of spoiling our opinion on this movie pretty close out of the gate, but
yeah, it's part 2 of Martin Scorsese month.
Woo woo.
Yeah, he's got a big movie coming up this
year. Do you know
year.
Specifically when it's coming out?
It's coming out in October.
Oh, so a while from now.
Yeah, we've got a little while, but this is when it fit into our schedule to do these, so we're doing them now. So we did Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear first from 91. Yeah. And now we're doing The Last Temptation of Christ from 1988. This is actually the movie that the reason why Cape Fear was created by Martin Scorsese or directed by Scorsese, because without The Last Temptation of Christ, Martin Scorsese wouldn't have gotten into this deal. Basically, he made the deal with, I think it was Universal, to essentially, they were like, okay, we'll allow you to make this very controversial movie based on this very controversial book if you'll do a very commercial movie for us in the next couple of years.
We'll let you make this weird movie as long as you make a good one afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I should explain my rationale for why I picked this movie. Is I mentioned in our Cape Fear episode that I'm not really a Scorsese guy. I mean, I know who he is. I know his big movies. He's kind of known for doing these kind of highbrow crime thrillers. So I was thinking we should do not a highbrow crime thriller.
Right.
And then I heard about The Last Temptation of Christ, which stars Willem Dafoe as Jesus Christ, and that it's a controversial movie based on a controversial book. So I argued we should do this movie, and you relented, which was a mistake.
Sometimes Blake does know best.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I had a lot of other movies on the list. Honestly, so I left this up to you guys to pick completely because I end up having a lot of final say on all of our movies.
That's right.
So I left this one up to you guys. Personally, I think After Hours was the one that most intrigued me because it was a Scorsese comedy that's potentially considered one of his more underrated films. He does have a lot of crime films, so we kind of try to shy away from that because Goodfellas is the obvious choice if we're doing crime because we haven't done Goodfellas yet.
Goodfellas, Taxi Driver. Yeah.
But we also did The Godfather this year. And so you got to spread those out a little bit and have those in your back pocket to do later.
Every now and then you need some biblical historical fiction to round things out.
And we've done Ben-Hur on this podcast already.
I was thinking a lot about Ben-Hur while watching this movie.
Yeah.
And thinking at times about how I'd rather be watching Ben-Hur.
Me too. But we'll probably talk about that more in the deep dive episode later when we get to our personal opinions and maybe some comparisons to that film.
Sure.
What I do want to say before we talk about The Last Temptation, we jump into the plot summary, characters and everything, is we should probably kind of talk about this a little bit. This isn't a religious podcast.
No.
So you and I are coming at this with, we're both a couple of white kids and
so white.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my God.
They grew up in small town Canada. So we were both raised with.
Well, you're Anglican, right?
Technically, I guess.
Right. You're technically Anglican in the same way that I'm technically Catholic.
Exactly.
We didn't grow up in extremely religious households.
And so and again, this is a movie podcast, so we're coming at this from an entertainment perspective and a perspective of who should watch this movie in 2023 and not does this follow the Bible kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because you and I we know the general plot beats of the Bible, but
sure. I mean, everyone in the West kind of does.
Exactly. So, but we're not coming at this this didn't follow the Bible exactly, so for that reason we don't like this movie kind of thing. We're coming at this from did this movie hold up in this
as a movie?
As a movie, yeah. Was it entertaining? Did I enjoy it? Would I recommend it to people? Who would I recommend this to? So that's kind of the perspective we're coming in from this. If you're coming in to this movie for a religious debate or something in that headspace, then that's
I'm sure you can find other podcasts and other YouTube videos that will explain everything this movie got wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I found a couple of them in researching this movie. So, yeah. Well, maybe with that little tantalizing note, we should jump into the plot summary.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's The Last Temptation of Christ follows, you guessed it, Jesus Christ during his, I guess you could say his formative years. As the movie starts, he's a carpenter and he's hearing voices. He's hearing supposedly the voice of God, and it follows him launching his ministry. And then you kind of know the story. He goes around, he preaches, and he gets into trouble. And that's the movie. Kind of what's interesting about this movie is that it basically follows, the same archetypical story, but what's interesting is how it characterizes Jesus.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, like, yeah, you kind of described it as like a film about the story of Jesus's life, but it's really at its heart, it's a character drama about the
guy.
Yeah,
the man, not so much the myth.
Exactly. And like, as a man having fears and doubts about himself and doubts about what he's doing and preaching and kind of like an imperfect look at somebody who's supposed to be perfect
more than perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is what makes this movie interesting, but it's what also makes it so controversial.
Exactly.
There's a great moment kind of early on where Jesus is speaking to another religious person, and this religious person is like, oh man, like, you're so lucky. God actually talks to you. Like, I would give anything to know, like, I would give anything to know, like, the mind of God or to hear the word of God. And Jesus kind of laughs bitterly and says, you think it's so great knowing what God wants from me? And then he has this really kind of great speech, which to me was kind of the highlight of the movie, where Jesus kind of just admits all his faults.
Right.
He says that his God is fear, that he's consumed with fear. He confesses to having all these very human failings, and basically his whole idea is like, how am I supposed to be the Messiah when, like, I'm not even, in his mind anyway, he's not even a good man.
Right.
So, and yeah, it's kind of attempting to bring an element of, like, let's say, psychological realism to this very kind of, I guess you could say, this very religious figure. And I can see how that would be incendiary to some people who worship this guy.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a good plot summary. In terms of characters and people you may know, and this is probably also part of the reason why you were so drawn to this, is Jesus is played by Willem Dafoe.
Willem freaking Dafoe.
Yeah, who's probably a favorite on this podcast. We've only done one other movie of his so far, Platoon, but both you and I really enjoyed him in that movie.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, in Platoon, I mentioned how weird it was seeing Willem Dafoe playing a good guy. If I thought it was weird seeing him play a good guy, imagine how weird it was seeing him play Jesus Christ.
The good guy.
Yeah, the ultimate good guy.
And you know what? Like, again, Willem Dafoe, he does a good job. Like, this is a good Willem Dafoe performance overall.
It's extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it's funny because he's known for playing bad guys, but at this point we've only done 2 good roles for him, and they're both good
guys.
Yeah.
And
it's just like Willem Dafoe is just such a great actor and so believable.
And I mean, he's got such like sinister features too, but like you believe him as Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's got this very kind of like, he's kind of got this like wide-eyed, innocent, like boyish charm to the role.
Right. And so, yeah, you might know Willem Dafoe. Like I said, talked about the Platoon already in a previous episode. Boondock Saints is always going to be my favorite of his.
Yep.
Also known as the Green Goblin in the Spider-Man series, who I think he really enjoys playing because I think he's talked about wanting to potentially reprise that role in the future again.
Well, he did reprise it for No Way Home.
He did,
and
yes.
He was arguably the best part of that movie.
I still haven't seen it, sadly. But
it's a good one.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I'm not a huge Spider-Man guy, so... It's not the top of my list to watch.
Okay.
Once it comes to a streaming site, I'll watch it, maybe.
It should be on a streaming site already. It's been over a year.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm just bad with my Spider-Man.
Come on, Blake. You act like you're extremely overworked or something.
Yeah.
Sad.
So our next main character is Judas. He's kind of, the big bad of the Bible, probably, like the guy who ratted Jesus out and caused his crucifixion. He's played by Harvey Keitel in this movie, which Harvey Keitel is a important actor to my filmography and what I like to watch. Like, he's in a lot of Quentin Tarantino's big movies like Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs, and especially Pulp Fiction. Like, he's my favorite character in
The Wolf.
Yeah, the Wolf.
If you remember.
I love the Wolf.
What does he say in that movie? Like, pretty please, with sugar on top.
Yeah. I act quick, I talk quick, and yeah, something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think the funniest gag in that movie is when he says, "I'll be there in 10 minutes," and then it's like 7 minutes later.
Yeah. Just zipping in.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's also known for The Irishman. Like, he's a frequent collaborator of Martin Scorsese, so that was where you'd most recently have seen him. But he's also important to the National Treasure series. He was in Grand Budapest Hotel of recent. He's really known for his tough guy presence in films, and he kind of has that in this film. We'll probably discuss and dissect his performance later in the film.
I really liked what they did with Judas in this movie, for the most part.
I'm going to debate you on that pretty hard.
All right, ding ding.
You know what? There's levels to my thought process on his performance of Judas, but anyway, more on that later. Mary Magdalene is the probably third main character of the film.
Yeah.
The prostitute that Jesus brings into his group of apostles.
Childhood friend who he's kind of, they're in love, kind of.
Yeah. But yeah, They have their own relationship.
We'll talk about that. Yeah.
Played by Barbara Hershey, who I didn't really know super well. However, she is in quite a few things, especially of recent. She was in the Once Upon a Time show playing Cora Mills for a number of episodes. And then she's also been in all of the Insidious movies.
I'm not familiar with either.
I watched Insidious 1. It wasn't my favorite horror movie, so I haven't seen any others.
Wait, did you?
On that.
Is Insidious the one with Patrick Wilson?
Yep.
Okay, I think you showed me that recently.
No, we haven't watched it together recently. We watched, you and I watched Haunting in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one's a good movie. I really like Haunting
movie.
in Connecticut. But Insidious, I thought was silly. But
well, if you thought it was silly, I'm really going to think it's silly.
So those are kind of the three main cast of the film, but there are some there's a number of actors in this that are relatively famous actors, starred in a lot of famous things. I'm only going to actually name two of them.
I think I know which one you're going to bring up next, but go on.
David Bowie.
Yes.
Yeah. David Bowie has a role in this. He plays Pontius Pilate, the Roman leader who ordered Jesus' crucifixion. He has a relatively quick cameo in the film, honestly.
It's almost kind of like, I watched this movie on Thursday night. We're recording on Sunday. And when he showed up, I sat up straight. I'm like, that's fucking David Bowie.
Yeah. It's a good performance from him.
Yeah, it's minor though. And it's very subdued for David Bowie.
I would have liked more of his scenes. Maybe one extra scene of his.
It's almost a little distracting, right? You're just like, is that David Bowie? And he's not acting like David Bowie. It's very restrained.
Yeah.
So
I could have used one more David Bowie as Pontius Pilate scenes.
I guess so, yeah. Or just have him do something more memorable, because he just kind of stands there and talks.
Yeah, and
it's
listens
almost
to Jesus. He doesn't even talk all that much either.
It's almost kind of like bringing in Christopher Walken for one very important, serious scene, and then having him leave the movie.
So you mean like Pulp Fiction?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. No, but that was funny, and
yeah, it was memorable.
It was memorable. It's almost like just having Christopher Walken play I don't know, a bit part, and then being like, all right, thanks, Chris. We'll take it from here.
That happens, yeah. Sometimes
I guess so, yeah.
People like to do cameos all the time.
That's what it was. It was like a cameo appearance.
Yeah, it was a cameo, and that's all you could say. Although he did have top billing, which, again, is probably that's using the name as a draw, right? Star
power. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, though, when Scorsese called up David Bowie and said, how'd you like to play Pontius Pilate, the guy who condemns Jesus to death?
one of the most hated figures in history.
And David Bowie was like, "Yes, of course, Marty, I'll be right there." That's not a David Bowie voice. That wasn't even close.
Oh God. The other actor that I wanted to mention is Harry Dean Stanton appears in this. He plays Paul, the apostle. So
right,
he's a character actor, but he's a character actor of the 70s and 80s in a lot of my favorite movies. He was in Alien, he was in Escape New York, he was in Christine, he was in Repo Man, like kind of sci-fi horror films, thrillers, that sort of thing.
I definitely heard the name before.
Yeah, like if you pulled up his face, you'd be like, yeah, I've seen him in other things. But like I said, every time I see him in a film, I'm like, all right, like I'm in kind of thing. You know, he's kind of got, because of the films that he's in and because of my relationship to those movies, I'm always like excited to see him in films, and he kind of elevates the films for me a little bit when he's in them.
Yeah, he just kind of like, he brings it up almost to full letter grade.
Yeah, almost. Martin Scorsese, the director, we haven't really talked too much detail about him. We talked about him in the last episode, honestly.
Sure.
But, you know, known for a lot of his crime films. Like I said, him and Harvey Keitel collaborated a number of times together. And as well, Robert De Niro and him. I was thinking about Robert De Niro a little bit when I was preparing for the episode, because Robert De Niro was originally considered for the role of Jesus. Would have been a very different movie with him as Jesus. I almost can't even picture him as Jesus.
If you think it's hard picturing Willem Dafoe's Jesus, it's almost like I'm just furrowing my brow trying to imagine it, especially hot off the heels of Cape Fear.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
I think it almost kind of reminds me of like when John Wayne played Genghis Khan. It would almost just be unbelievable or like preposterous.
Right. Well, and on that note too, like the way that this film is structured is the Jewish people in this film are played by Americans, and the Roman people are played by British people. So there's the British accent and the New York American accent. And everybody's white, more or less, in this film that takes place in the Middle East.
And was that a conscious choice by Scorsese?
Yes, that was a conscious choice to structure it like that. And, you know, like...
is it to give the Jewish people kind of a more familiar everyman vibe and to give the Romans a more, like, imperious, overbearing presence?
I wouldn't be shocked if that was the intention, you know, and I could see if somebody was an absolute purist being offended by that. However, we have seen this a number of times happen, and most recently, I think it was 2019, the TV miniseries Chernobyl, where all of the Russian characters were played by British people. So in that case, like, you know, if you pivot everybody into a different nationality and you just kind of go with it, then it kind of works.
I'd never really thought about it that way, but I guess maybe you're trying to avoid, maybe you think it'll be easier for like a Western audience to connect with a more traditionally Western aesthetic.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense.
Well, I mean, probably the Western would picture Jesus as white most of the time.
Yeah, anyway, also, I mean, yeah, good point. There's also that, too.
Well, like, think of The Last Samurai, right? And Tom Cruise playing a samurai. Like, that rubbed people the wrong way. And
yeah.
that's kind of understandable because, you know, everybody except for him in that film is Asian. And so, like...
And then there's Tom Cruise.
So it's like, I don't know. This is a whole race thing.
Yeah, I don't
like. It's not. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't agree with like that. I don't necessarily agree with it in this film, but I can kind of understand it in.
Well, this movie was a different time too.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
I mean, this definitely wouldn't fly today.
No, and I don't think it should fly today.
No,
I think in a sense that it does this film a bit of disservice. However, because it was so coordinated with, you know, the British playing the Romans and the Americans playing the Jewish people of Jerusalem, like I think that it works slightly more. Yeah,
potentially. I guess the closest kind of companion piece to this movie would be like The Passion of the Christ.
Right.
And was that, I haven't seen it, but they actually like, you know, didn't they actually do like, they spoke in like Aramaic in that movie or something?
Yeah, they did.
I don't know what what they did for like the casting choices, but
yeah.
And I mean, that movie is its own other kettle of fish with our good friend Mel Gibson, but
Yeah. But anyway, I think the moral of the story is, in today's environment, and in the past you should have, but in today's environment you should absolutely be casting the races and nationalities of the characters and how those characters are supposed to be, really.
yeah, and I mean, there's other potentially like shaky ethical things about this movie that we can talk about later, but that's a conversation for next week's episode. But
just keep the controversies rolling.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh man, this movie is hard to talk about. Who is this movie for? So I think I'm gonna give you the floor to start.
Oh,
with
come
this
on.
one, because you picked this movie, and yeah, the floor is yours.
All right, I see how it is. I guess if what we just said sounds interesting to you, like you'd like to see a more kind of, and I say this with massive air quotes, more like psychologically realistic portrayal of this kind of arguably the most iconic story in Western civilization, then you should check it out. Yeah, that's who I'd recommend it to. I mean, I wanted to see it just because I'm starting to kind of warm up to Scorsese, and I wanted to see what a non-obvious Scorsese movie looked like.
Right.
And yeah, I saw it, didn't I? So
you sure did, Michael.
Yeah, I guess maybe like, and then I don't know, I know there's the book, and the book is also controversial, but like if you're a fan of the book as well, I don't know, like if you're a hardcore Christian, if you're gonna want to see this movie or not.
That's an interesting
I
discussion.
almost kind of wish one of us was, a believer, to see how. I would almost like if one of us was like a devout Christian, just to see how they reacted to it.
Well,
but
and so here's the thing, and this is a discussion that I kind of wanted to have with you now, is let's break this film into 3 parts. The first 2 parts of part 1 and part 3 are heavy into the mind of Jesus as a flawed human being.
Yes.
And as a human being with fears and doubts, and who makes mistakes. And so those parts are obviously the parts that are heavily not represented in the Bible. The middle part is really like the representation of Jesus in the Bible, telling the stories of his miracles and the stuff that he did in his life. And a lot of that comes directly from the Bible, like with, obvious, like not word for word, like what he was doing or talking about or saying kind of thing.
Sure. But I mean, even those sections do portray him as kind of flawed and unsure.
Yeah.
Not so much flawed. I was going to say just
unsure of himself. Yeah.
Extremely unsure of himself,
right?
Like there's the famous story in the Bible, Jesus resurrecting Lazarus. There's that. It's actually a pretty good scene in the movie where he he rolls the boulder away from Lazarus's tomb, and then he reaches out, and Lazarus reaches a hand out to. And Jesus almost kind of has this look on his face, like, I can't believe that worked.
Yeah.
like, whoa.
and so that's kind of my thinking here, is to bring this back to the reason why I was going to bring this up is like, if you're a very religious person, you might be perturbed by the first and third part of this film because it's such a deviation from like your original source material. But if you're somebody who's like, a religious casual, I guess I would say.
A filthy casual, yeah.
Like you and I, like I said, we grew up in we were baptized, like we grew up and learned about religion and the stories of the Bible.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah,
we got the gist of it.
The first and third part to me actually worked more from an interesting entertainment film perspective than the middle part, which I was like, yeah, okay, I already know all this stuff. Why am I rehashing this again?
And that's kind of interesting, is that like the plot, for the most part, except for one kind of deviation at the end, the plot beats are more or less the same as in the Bible. It's just, for the most part, there are some wild deviations, but occasionally, like, even someone like me, a self-proclaimed filthy casual, like, in the middle part of this movie, I'm like, oh, we're doing this now. Like, it's kind of like, it's like they're playing the hits.
Yeah. And so as a religious cash, I think for me, like at the middle part, I kind of struggle with, because again, I was like, this is the familiar stuff. Like, I want to see.
Yeah, we've been here before.
Yeah. Like, and this has been done so many times, like I'm more interested in the unique take on Jesus' life here. But if you were a super religious person, you're going to be like, the first and third part are blasphemous, essentially.
You know what? There's one detail towards the very beginning of the movie that actually really made me sit up straight. I don't know if we should save it for our spoiler.
Well, let's talk about it in spoilers. The other thing I was going to say as well is like this film doesn't shy away from violence at all. Like,
nope.
That's kind of Martin Scorsese's thing. Like he often portrays violence in a pretty flashy or realistic way, depending on which film it is. But you know, in all fairness, like the Bible does depict some stuff as pretty brutal.
Yeah, come on.
So some of those stories, but then there's the thing of like, you know, if I was a super religious person, I might not want all this violence and you know, pretty graphic stuff. Like there's some pretty graphic nudity in this film. There's some pretty graphic like sacrifices and stuff like that. Like it's a pretty gory film, honestly.
Kinda, yeah.
But like in that sense, it's kind of probably portraying some of what life back then was like.
In some ways, it's kind of faithful to the subject matter.
Yeah,
pun somewhat intended.
So you know, there's just like there's just so many. What is the word I'm looking for? Because of all of these different contradictions, that's the word I'm looking for.
This is I think we should just say it. This is kind of a hard movie to recommend, isn't it?
It absolutely
is.
is.
Yeah, it's not even that it sounds like you and I have strong feelings with the movie. I didn't particularly dislike it that much, which isn't exactly a ringing endorsement.
No,
but
I didn't actively hate the film, but it's not like one that I will ever return to.
Yeah.
Whereas to compare, like the obvious comparison here is Ben-Hur, one of the biggest religious-related films of this time period ever made. And Ben-Hur was incredible, and I will definitely go and check that out. But it uses Jesus as like a force in the background. You know?
Yeah, it's actually the way this movie and Ben-Hur portray Jesus, it's almost the polar opposites. Like in Ben-Hur, you never see Jesus' face, and he never speaks. You're right, he's just kind of this overbearing supernatural force, whereas in this movie, Jesus is kind of whiny and cowardly at times. Yeah.
And this is the other thing too, and I'll talk about this more when we get into the deep dive, but this film has a much smaller budget than something like Ben-Hur does at the time. And it wasn't like a film that studios were necessarily jumping to make either. So there was a lot of constraints in making this. And so it doesn't have the same kind of grand set pieces that Ben-Hur does. It's a very minimalistic film.
Yeah, this is almost a very, it's a very intimate movie in the sense that you're right, it's kind of small.
Yeah.
It's small. It's a small scale movie despite being about Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So,
but I guess, you know, maybe if I could go there, if you want to go like historically accurate, maybe this is a slightly more historically accurate, you know?
Yeah, I don't even want to.
I'm not a historian, so
historical accuracies.
I'm sorry.
Oh man, I can't believe you made us do this one. I'll probably say that at least twice more in this.
It's not a bad movie. It's just
so difficult to talk about when it's as a religious movie, because the comparison would be like if they made a movie about Muhammad, which they would never do, but if they did, it would be just as difficult to talk about, right?
I guess that's kind of the thing is you and I, you know, as we said, we're filthy casuals. So to me, and you know, I don't mean to upset anyone by saying this, but to me, Jesus is like a character in a story, right? But watching this movie, there were different points staring at the screen, like, oh, this is someone's God. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, actually, I have people in my life who worship this guy, and this movie is, you know, portraying him very differently. But that's kind of why I did, I appreciated that this movie opens with a disclaimer that says, what does it say specifically? It says, like, you know, this is not based on the scriptures. It's a work of fiction that depicts an eternal war. I think that disclaimer is extremely important to what kind of the intentions of the movie are.
Exactly. Like I said, at the end of the day, this is a character study, a character drama, and if you're interested in that kind of a film, this is probably for you. As long as you're not hardcore religious to the point where you would say, you know, this is a film that depicts things that weren't in the Bible or depicts ideas that that Jesus has that maybe conflict with my ideas of Jesus. Like, obviously, then that film isn't for you. But if you're okay with that sort of idea, maybe this film is an interesting watch. But
You know what? If you are religious and you have seen this movie, like, I'm curious to hear what you thought about it, because I can see it going both ways.
right,
I think I watched a YouTube video where two priests kind of watched one scene, and in the comments, like, some religious people were saying, like, yeah, this movie sucks, and others were saying, no, like, I really enjoyed the movie.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. This is such a tough movie to talk about. So when to watch? This is so obvious and dumb, but
Sundays.
This is a Sunday afternoon movie to watch, and not for the obvious reason that like Sunday is when you go to church kind of thing, but it's almost a 3-hour movie, and the pacing isn't always quite there. Like, it's not a 2023 fast-paced movie. So a Sunday afternoon when you're laying on the couch and have nothing else going on, maybe you take a nap around the middle part.
You could tell Blake really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, but that's where I would recommend this film. I don't know if you have any other
I watched it on a
thoughts.
Thursday night. I actually, to be fair, like, this movie is 3 hours long, and like, I felt the first hour kind of dragged, but for the most part, like, I wasn't bored.
So here's my thing: is I watched this as well over the work week, and for me, the middle part, I was almost asleep by the time we got to the third act, and the third act I thought was one of the more compelling parts of the film.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was just too tired to really get into it.
You were kind of exhausted by that point.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I think this absolutely fits into a Sunday afternoon watch rather than like starting it at.
It sounds
8:30.
like you watched it like a mini series where you just watched over the course of a week.
No, I watched it all in one go.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay. I thought you said you'd like paced yourself.
No, I watched it
Okay.
all in one go, but it by the third act, I was just tired and not.
It kind of reminds me of when we watched Vertigo, where like the third act to us was the only interesting part, but by the time we got there, we were both like, "All right, like, yeah."
So, yeah, and that's kind of like the movie Bodies, that is a recent one that I can maybe compare to. Like, I was kind of irritated with the movie for a good portion of it, and then the last act, I was like, "Oh, that's pretty great," but at the same time, like, you know, if the last 10 minutes or the last 30 minutes of a movie that's 3 hours long is the only compelling part to the film, then I can't say it's a good film necessarily.
It's kind of like when someone recommends you a show and they're like, "Well, the first season sucks, but then it gets better." And it's like, why can't it just be good straight out of the gate? Like, it's again, random. It's kind of like having to recommend BoJack Horseman to people and being like, "Well, the first 6 episodes really suck, but then it gets really good."
Well, and you know what? And like sometimes I can handle that because it's bite-sized pieces of suck.
Sure.
Rather than 3 hours of suck that you have to
2
watch.
hours and 45 minutes of hardcore suck.
Yeah.
Followed by great
Yeah.
not sucking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the same story with Mad Men. Like I always say to people with Mad Men, just stick through the first season. Even like the second season, I think is a little slower than the rest of the series. But season 3 and season 4 are like the greatest seasons of
Yeah,
TV
but you
ever.
know what? You showed me the first episode of Mad Men, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So,
True.
yeah. This
Anyway.
episode has been brought to you by Mad Men. This episode has been brought to you by Random Tangents.
Yeah. Where to watch? So right now it's streaming on Prime. I had some quality issues though while I was streaming on Prime. It was really weird. Like I had some weird choppiness to it.
Oh, I did too. I thought that was my connection.
Okay, so I think that's probably consistent on Prime across the board. Then I wanted to ask you
Okay.
that. So it's really the first time that I've had like a choppy film.
Did you
on
have
through
like
Prime.
sound dropping in and out at times?
My sound. I didn't notice any sound problems.
Okay, that might have just been me.
Yeah, it was choppy frames and stuff like that. But it's interesting that you and I both experienced poor quality of this one on there.
Yeah.
And I think that is our spoiler-free discussion of Last Temptation of Christ.
That's right.
So, yeah, I think this one's going to be for a very small fraction of our viewer base and of viewer bases in general.
You know what, though? I will say, you and I didn't enjoy this movie all that much, but it is interesting to talk about. And sometimes that's better than a movie that you enjoy, but you have nothing to say about afterwards.
Yeah, that's very fair. There's a lot of movies that you watch and you never spend an extra half a brain cell thinking about ever again. So you know what?
There's also people like that. Like I had a good time with so and so, but I'll never think about them again.
Yeah, that's completely fair as well. So, anyway, we will
See you next week.
Yeah, for the deep dive episode.
Bye.